All right, back with another episode of Fresh Tracks Weekly. This week we're talking about the increase of hunters in the West along with the increase in population in the western states. What does that mean for the future of wildlife and their habitats? And we're also going to talk about the friction between non-resident and resident hunters. Speaking of non-resident and resident hunting, I unfortunately participated in some of that friction last week as a non-resident who shot a bull. That definitely led to the disappointment of some residents who had a tag. So I felt bad about that situation, but I heard that after I shot my bull that a bigger bull showed up, so I'm hoping that they were able to get on that guy and kill it. But on the bright side on that hunt, I got to share it with my dad and Jace, which was super fun. And the stock ended up being pretty unique as well. We were able to ski in using skis and skins because the snow is pretty deep. As soon as you stepped off, you just fall down to your waist almost.
That's tough on an old man.
Overall, I'm happy with the experience, but not gonna lie, I'm definitely craving some September archery hunts after that one. We don't have a fishing corner this week because Michael is out fishing, and he's shooting a cool video actually. So hopefully we'll be back next week with the fishing corner. But for now, here's some news that we found relevant this week. In Washington, the bill to make hunting and fishing a constitutional right is making progress. The bill passed out of the Ag Committee and is moving to the Rules Committee. We've talked about constitutional rights to hunt and fish in past episodes and how more and more states have been trying to get similar amendments to their constitutions, some successfully and some unsuccessfully. Many outdoorsmen have begun to worry as the dynamics of their state's fish and game commissions are changing and leaning more towards animal preservation without having hunting in the equation. Most states' fish and game agencies have long been run with hunting and fishing as a primary management tool and the funding mechanism to maintain healthy wildlife populations. The North American model has widely been regarded as the most successful example of bringing wildlife back from the brink and maintaining stable populations. So when changes begin to threaten that system, sportsmen are quick to defend it. With the current bill moving forward in Washington, it means that there will be 17 state representatives that will be voting whether or not it moves out of this Ag Committee. It still has a long way to become law, but if you're a Washington resident who cares about this, now would probably be a good time to call your representatives who are on that Ag Committee. Howl for Wildlife has a call to action on their website where you can find all of those representatives' contact infos. We'll put a link down in the video description. In Utah, 7 different structures were recently completed to help fish and wildlife in the state. The structures stem from the Utah Wildlife Migration Initiative, which began in 2017 to study migration patterns of both fish and wildlife. With this data, they are able to identify areas of importance where projects can improve survival of the respective species. The recently completed projects include 4 separate stretches of wildlife exclusion fencing along highways, which will funnel wildlife to safer crossing locations, which could come in the form of zones that just have slower speed limits, or better yet, crossing structures like overpasses or underpasses. 2 of the projects consisted of fish barriers where they exclude non-native species like brook trout from moving upstream into the native cutthroat trout habitat. When these species mix, the more adaptable brook trout outcompete the cutthroat that can lead to the demise of the native fish completely. The last project was a removal of a diversion dam to allow bluehead suckers and Colorado River cutthroat trout to move freely to access important rearing habitat. It might seem slightly ironic that the last 3 projects included both structures to stop fish passage and then also to improve fish passage, but it's just a case-by-case basis what's best for the area and best for the species. But anyway, these projects were completed through a collaborative effort between multiple agencies and groups, including the Utah Division of Wildlife Resources, Utah Department of Transportation, Utah's Habitat Council, the U.S. Forest Service, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Helper City, and Trout Unlimited. It's cool to see Utah, among other states, implementing these projects to better understand wildlife movements and mitigate these problems. There's also many other upcoming projects in multiple states, so we'll have to keep updating as we learn more about these. The TRCP recently posted a call to action to comment on the new Forest Service amendments to their nationwide management plans, in particular, the promotion of old-growth forest conditions. Old-growth forests have become increasingly rare from logging practices, wildfire, insects, and disease. The Forest Service has recognized the value of maintaining old-growth forests, which initiated the process of amending these plans. The hope is that it will enhance the agency's ability to utilize active stewardship, allowing for restoration to maintain forest resilience and reduce uncharacteristic wildfire. The goal is to also allow the agency to implement management to promote young growth habitats where old growth is not present, creating the necessary conditions to eventually have that old growth. Promoting and conserving old growth can benefit everything from keeping streams and rivers cold for fish to providing important wintering cover and habitat for wildlife. So what the actual changes are yet to be determined, but that's why the TRCP is encouraging hunters and anglers to comment on these management plans to make sure that their voices are heard in regards to how it will actually be implemented. An interesting article was recently published by the Wildlife Society that summarized a research project that's trying to understand how widespread the impacts from renewable energy could be from analyzing the carcasses of birds found at solar and wind farms. She's been using what is known as stable isotope analysis on the birds' feathers to determine where they came from, whether they migrated into the area or were local. Stable isotope analysis is super cool. The actual analysis part is way over my head, but I was able to participate in some of the grunt work collecting feathers and prepping samples for a different research project for sage grouse. But the dumbed down version of the stable isotope analysis is that they can match elements from the feathers to elements of a geographic area. In the case of this study, they were able to use the amount of hydrogen located in the bird's feathers, which would indicate the amount of precipitation in the area that that bird came from. But anyway, to just geek out a little more, the uses of stable isotopes have been used in a variety of uses, identifying ancient material, dating things back thousands of years, used in hydrology applications, identifying where various water sources come from. But more and more wildlife researchers are beginning to also use this tool, which is pretty cool. But anyway, back to the renewable energy study, the researchers found that 51% of the birds that died at wind farms were non-local and 71% of the birds that died at solar farms were non-local. They hypothesized that the glittering solar panels may look like water to migrating birds, attracting individuals that had migrated long distances. All right, with that, we are jumping into the deeper dive on the impacts of everybody moving out west. Increased hunter numbers in the West. That's what we're talking about for the deeper dive. Yeah, and not just hunter numbers, also just increase in population.
Because our buddy Andrew McKean at Outdoor Life is who's responsible for this version.
Inspired this conversation.
He wrote about how resident population growth in the Rocky Mountains was kind of his basic premise at the start, is creating a lot of friction between residents and non-residents. Am I right in that, in the way I've said that?
Yeah. I feel like he talked a lot about this, like the non-resident, why everybody, well, the title of the article was why everybody loves to hate non-resident elk hunters.
Yeah. That's.
But I mean, like, it's not, I think we can expand this conversation to outside of elk hunting and, outside of resident versus non-resident.
Yeah.
So, I think a lot of people people who hunt public land, people who hunt in the West have noticed increased crowding, and so that causes the concern. I think that's at the root of why people get upset.
Yeah.
And then a lot of times you can blame non-residents. A lot of times people like to blame non-residents or just whatever. There's a lot of things you can blame.
Right.
You can blame us, right? A lot of people are going to want to blame us for increased crowding in the West.
Absolutely. So, we get it all the time. That's
right.
And if people want to think that's that's up to them. I always go back to, and Andrew touched on this, about resident population growth. So right here in front of me, I've got the state of Colorado and the state of Idaho, because the Rocky Mountains have grown in resident population growth more rapid than any geographic area of the state, other than a couple of the southwest states of Nevada and Arizona and Utah, and a couple of the southeast states of the Carolinas and Georgia, I think.
Yeah, and I think that's at the root of the problem, is it's just like there's just more people.
Yeah, lots of people.
And like non-residents, each Western state has different, methods of restricting and capping non-residents, and most of them also have methods of somewhat restricting and capping residents.
Yep.
But other times there's no cap on resident hunting, which could be a thing in the past. Who knows? Or in the near future. I hope not. But I think there's a lot of, like we said, there's a lot of things, but I think we have to, when you just take a step back and look at the big picture, there's just so many people, so many more people that are moving into the Western United States.
Yeah.
And just
For the same reason I moved here. I'm part of the problem. I moved here in my wife and I came here for our honeymoon in 1989 to this spot right here in Bozeman. And we ended up moving here shortly thereafter. So you were born here.
yeah, I was gonna be like, who's
Yeah. Of the
who's all born in Montana?
Right. Of the three of us, Marcus.
I'm about to get my least favorite question since moving here.
Where are you from?
But I've only been here 30. Yeah, I'm going on 33 years.
Yeah, me too.
So I always like to. I forgot about that. I moved here the year Marcus was born. But no matter how far back you go, I have the Colorado chart here in front of me. Colorado in 1989, the year that I came to Montana on my honeymoon, 3,276,000 people. At the end of 2022, I don't know what it is that in 2023, but 5.8 million. So what's that? 2.55 million more people
Right.
in Colorado. Idaho's really they've taken it in a serious beating. So in 1990, they had 1,012,000 people. Now they have just under 2 million people. Montana, we had 810,000 people, and now we have 1.12 million people.
And it'd be interesting to know why a lot of these people moved here, but and you can't apply it to everybody. But I feel like a lot of people do enjoy some sort of outdoor recreation,
right?
Especially of those who move to the Western U.S.
Yep.
And I'm not going to say it's not like every single one of them is a hunter, but a lot of people are outside, and just knowing that also has an impact on wildlife and habitats and urban sprawl, developments,
right?
All of it. I mean, obviously, just human population is going to have an impact on wildlife, and
right.
As we obviously like to look at it as from the perspective of hunters, it's going to impact that.
Right.
And so I think it's hard to try to get at what exactly, it's going to look like 10 years from now if trends continue the way they are. Like it's going to be very different. And that's just hard to stomach, I think. It's hard to stomach for me. I love the current system that we have.
I don't know. How old are you, Jace?
27.
27. So I'm 32 years older than you. In 32 years, do you think we're going to have more wildlife or less wildlife in the West?
I am optimistic.
Okay.
I think we will have more.
I like the optimism.
I don't know, for a couple of reasons. I think we have very good wildlife management systems.
Mm-hmm.
I think that people are starting to put more emphasis on caring about wildlife and just have a greater value, even just from private landowner perspective, and so there's still plenty of examples of private landowner tolerance being super low for wildlife. But now, I feel like sometimes, or in certain aspects, that changes and there's more tolerance and more private landowner tolerance. But the big crux of the issue is, I think, is habitat. That's going to be the biggest limiting factor. And so, being able to identify these critical areas, primarily winter range.
Yep.
I mean, not to say that summer range and other parts of the season don't matter, but I feel like a lot of times the bottleneck is winter range availability.
Yep.
And I think that a lot of states have done a really good job at preserving and protecting winter range.
We have in Montana.
Yeah, and there obviously we can find examples, good and bad, on both sides, and maybe we're going to continue to lose habitat, but it's just can we find a way to manage and to keep enough to keep at least current population levels? And I don't know. I mean, are you more pessimistic in that respect? Do you think
I don't know. What's your projection, Jace? More wildlife or less wildlife?
I would like to say more wildlife.
Yeah.
But it's hard to say. I mean, as long as people just make the right decisions, I think we can get there. But I think it's just harder. Inevitably, it's just going to be harder. It's a harder task with the more people as the populations grow across the world.
Yeah.
So.
And you touched on it, Marcus. It's the year-round recreation also. We always used to think that hunting was the big contributing factor outside of weather and disease and stuff. But we have a crazy amount of year-round recreational activity that has grown way faster than hunting has grown. And now we're reading the studies of how impactful that is. So I look at Montana. The year I moved here, we gave away just under 400 ram tags.
Right.
Now we give away less than 200 ram tags.
Yeah,
Right.
and that's an
And
example
that's
where
one
it
example.
has decreased. But
Mule deer numbers, the charts in every state, Montana included, from 1990 to today, are way down. Pronghorn numbers in Wyoming at the time were over 600,000. Right now, they're a little over 300,000.
we had a significant weather event last year.
But even before the significant weather event, we were only in the 400,000s.
Right.
So,
but we got to always remember, rewind 80, 90 years before that, and all of the numbers were low.
Right.
And then humans came, that's after humans entered the landscape.
Yep.
We decided that there was a problem, and we increased that number.
Right.
And like it went, and I sure hope it wasn't a peak. Maybe it was, but maybe like the demand on resources and more and more people is going to be the demise of wildlife. But I hope not. I think that there's, and I shouldn't say that every single wildlife species is going to continually grow. I mean, it's like, but I think that there's going to be peaks and valleys, and I don't know. Do you think it's doom and gloom? I mean, I never buy into doom and gloom, because if I bought into the doom and gloom, all these things that we have on the whiteboard here of why we show up every day to advocate for conservation and wild things, I wouldn't show up if I wasn't the optimist and thought that you guys are going to have a brighter hunting future than I do. The other question I'd ask to that, and I'm just asking these kind of rhetorically, but they're very relevant to the article that Andrew wrote, is even if population numbers stayed the same, human population, and resident hunter numbers stayed the same, and wildlife numbers stayed the same, do you think with the trends that we're seeing in private land access, which is a huge part in a state of Montana that 2/3 is private, do you think we're going to have more access or less access in 30 years, 32 years, when you're my age, Jace? This one's hard.
Yeah.
Again, the optimist in me wants to think that we'll have more, but unless there's a fundamental switch in how everything works, it probably won't go that way. Right. Because in the same time, when you have increased, like when a landowner, for instance, recognizes the value of a mature bull elk, and like chances are they want, more mature bull elk, which means less hunting pressure, and they can charge an outfitter or have an outfitter guide there for a stupid high fee.
Right.
But there's also programs like the block management program. There's a lot of efforts that are being made to try to somehow make it more of a democracy of hunting, for lack of a better term, but just like providing access to those who don't have the deepest pockets. And so if we can continue to develop programs like that and promote programs like block management, then maybe. Yeah. I know there was talk of people buying ranches and having some sort of a tag lottery to be able to hunt private ranches. That's another avenue that who knows could grow, but it's just like, it is hard because, I mean, it's a capitalistic society. If you have this big there's a bull elk's worth a lot of money basically. And so how do you make that a public resource if demand continues to increase? It's tough. I don't know. I just throw those out there because I look at you guys and I want someone before me made hunting what it was for my generation. Right. And I feel the obligation that with you guys, I got to do what I can and with our platforms so that you guys have it better than I had it because someone did the same for me. But I look at all these factors and I think about them not because I give up. We only have one path forward. Yeah. That's more wildlife on the hills,
more accessible land that is going to take a lot of creative ways to keep it accessible or to add accessible land, or we just give up. I ain't giving up.
Right.
So all of this does get back to a large part, and that's what the article Andrew wrote about non-residents kind of getting you're the one who gets pushed off the end of the bench.
Right.
When residents say, you know what, there's more of us now and there's less accessible land for us, we got to make a change somewhere. And the only place where there's any play in the shock absorber is the resident, non-resident allocation. And we see it, we saw it a couple of years ago in Wyoming, changing the allocation between resident and non-resident for moose, goat, sheep, and bison. Colorado's talking about it right now.
Yep.
Many years ago, New Mexico cut their allocation to non-residents. Oregon cut their allocation to non-residents in, I think, 2009 or 10.
Right.
So,
but at the same time, I think, like we talked about, the increase in resident hunters, and then it's hard to try to take into account all of the different factors because there's just so many things. I think there's also a worry and a concern that there's more hunter days afield. So, just because you bought a license doesn't mean that you hunted exactly 5 days.
Right.
Some people are going and spending 2 weeks, and and I think that was one of the things that Andrew wrote about non-residents is the complaining coming from residents. Like, these guys come in and they hunt for 14 days.
Right.
And it's just like that many more hunter days on the landscape has a pretty big impact on, the enjoyment of the hunt for whoever else is out on that same land.
I think Andrew does a really good job of explaining that it's not just one thing. It's a lot of things. And I get the frustration, but I guess maybe I'm able to look in the rearview mirror because I'm great and say, here are the things I've observed. And there were challenges everywhere along the way in this path that I've lived. And it's just a matter of, are we going to do something about it? Or are we going to get on Facebook and complain about it? And I'm sure you guys are tired of me saying build a bigger pie.
Well, that's I like what we were talking about before we started recording is this you talking about like the kind of the scarcity idea, and then you're just constantly arguing over the smaller and smaller pie. Like, how do we get less people out there? How do we get, less whatever? And the writing on the wall, if it continues the way it is, it doesn't matter how much we argue over that stuff. There's going to continue to be increased demand for access and for wildlife. So rather than trying to argue over who does and doesn't get access, why don't we worry about making the pie bigger, more wildlife, more access? I mean, those are the fights that I would prefer to fight rather than just like, no, screw you guys can't come here or whatever it might be. Mm-hmm. And that's going to happen. Like both things are going to happen. Like we are going to restrict people, but continually thinking that that's the only problem is you're focusing on one tiny part of the problem and not looking at the big picture.
Right. It's what I call the race to zero.
Yeah.
I mean, by the time you're my age, Jace, if that's all we worry about is fighting over a smaller piece of pie every year, we're not going to have much pie left.
No, there'll be some crumbs left over. That's about it.
So that's why we get up every day, and that's why we come here. And that's why we do all the things we do. And, we'll have people who want to simplify it and criticize us as being the problem. And I accept that.
Yeah.
That comes with the territory we operate in. But it doesn't take my eye off what I know is the solution. And the solution is conservation, advocacy for the wildlife and the access.
Yeah.
And those two are what gets us through this.
For sure. No, and that's, I mean, I'd be lying if I said I didn't think about running this platform and impacting the amount of hunters that are on the landscape. It goes through my mind for sure.
Do we ever have a day where we don't have that discussion in some context?
Yeah, no, I mean,
we do.
But it's just like that being said, it's just like trying to build rather than tear down is kind of the simplest way I can put it. And it's just, I don't know. It's just like constantly going through my head of how do we make things better, wildlife habitat, more wildlife, more habitat, basically, more access. But it's just, it's tough because when you're sitting there arguing about how small the pie's getting, I don't know.
It is. And it's the human nature in all the studies are that we were born and evolved with a reason why the default is the scarcity idea, that we have to preserve or get for ourselves what we can. Because back in the day, we didn't have collaborative mechanisms to do a lot of this stuff. There wasn't a lot of abundance. So the human mindset is, I got to focus on what I can get for me.
Right.
There's nothing wrong with that. That's the human tendency. We evolved that way. The what they call abundance theory or abundance is, let's make more. Let's make the economy bigger. The abundance theory is taught a lot in business school. How do you make economic growth better for everybody?
Right.
Well, it applies to just about everything in our life too when you get to it. That's what this really is are we going to accept the scarcity model of, okay, it's going to get worse and worse every year and we're just going to fight over our little piece? Well, eventually someone says, well, I'm going to just go buy that ranch then. And then they block out more people.
Right.
Or whatever it is. Or we do the other things. But I don't want, I hope we never get to the point, but I know a lot of people are already advocating that everything in Montana should go to a limited entry draw for residents.
I mean, it's that way in a lot of states.
Yeah. I mean, Utah, Nevada, Arizona, New Mexico.
I hate that idea personally. Just, growing up here and just like being able to hunt deer and elk every year is pretty special. But at the same time, it's like, if we continue to see more and more resident hunters or just hunters in general, yeah.
And
what do you do?
Oregon went that way to where everything for a lot of their species went to limited draw, even for residents. And the state kept growing and growing and growing. And then the non-resident portion went from 10% to 5%. And for some species, it's 2%.
Yeah. So
it affects everybody. If you're a non-resident, it affects you. No matter where you live, you're affected by it. Or if you're a resident, you're affected by it. So the common thread of all that is the bigger pie. Everyone's going to buy me an apron. I put a baker hat on me. Newberg, I'm so tired of you saying build a bigger pie. So I think Andrew's article does a good job of pointing it out and reminding us that these are where the arguments lead us, but they're not. It's not the answer.
Right.
It's not the sustainable answer.
No, yeah. It's part of it, but it's not. It's a small part of it.
Yeah.
Looking at the big picture, like, people love to focus on one aspect of an issue, and it's never that simple. So anyway, I don't know. It was kind of a rambling conversation, but just some thoughts that were in our minds this morning. And
yeah. How many states are you going to apply for this year, Jace?
Wyoming, Arizona, Colorado, Nevada.
5 or 6?
About 5. Yeah, we'll call it 5.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I'll do
7 or 8 probably.
Yeah.
But I don't know how much of an outlier we are in that. Like, how many? Yeah, I don't know.
I don't know either. It's so I just ask that because that puts you as a non-resident in all those states that you apply in.
Yeah.
And so whatever those and it illustrates my point of asking that was we're all non-residents in 49 other states.
Yeah.
So whatever we're asking for this treatment of non-residents in our state, expect the same 49 other places. And I get it. We're a state-based system, right? Mm-hmm. The beneficiaries of the public trust for that state are the citizens of that state, not the non-residents. So when you have a state-based system, you're going to have some of these weird outcomes too. And I'm with you, Marcus. It is not that simple. But I don't know if we've solved any of the world's problem. Other than if you own real estate in Colorado or Idaho, you're a beneficiary of all their population growth.
Right.
Or in Bozeman.
Yeah.
So.
Well, anyway, I think there's obviously a lot more room for future discussions in this realm, but just some food for thought for today, I guess.
Yeah, I'm going to continue with my abundance thinking. And the world can think I'm crazy, but I don't know any other way to think. So, but anyhow, thanks, Andrew. Appreciate you instigating a bunch of discussion here at our office, and I'm sure across the hunting world. Go to Outdoor Life and check out that article if you haven't. It's interesting to read and to think about.
All right. Thank you, guys.